And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Yo, Lord Willin, Jeff Canarsie, Mob Talk Radio. Check it out. Yo, we stay quiet like Russell Buffalino when things will get ugly like Pepsi's death in Casino. Who do we know? No one, nobody. But we're all well respected like Della Croce and Gotti. I know wild nights, Havana nocturne. Light up a cigar and watch your spot burn. You'll get patty whacked, I'm tough like Irish dock workers. Rubber guys with guys, hooligans and block lurkers. Corner berserkers, street savvy soldiers. You owe, you better pay. Don't make me say I told you. Code you don't betray, I say what I mean. Providence and Brooklyn all the way to the bean. I'd rather be unseen, like Vinny the Chin. I don't gotta go to Vegas to see cities of sin. Pull the pin, drop bombs like Danny Green. I write homicide like the murder machine. Lansky, Luciano, mastermind the racket. Up in the clam house with $1 million in my jacket. Move around when the streets get darker. Pay homage to real bosses like Gambino and Patriarcha. Mob talking, but you don't talk to the mob. Lord Will and Jeff Canarsie, we stay on our job.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie, and we have a big show today. We're going to do a massive Q&A as well. We're going to cover Paul Castellano, which is probably surprising to a lot of you because usually when we talk about Paul Castellano on this show, it's usually not in the most positive light, only because it's attached to John Gotti, and there's a lot of different things that sort of play into who Paul Castellano was. But I'm hoping you're going to come away from this show maybe seeing more into Paul Castellano than you have in the past, because not a lot of things get reported. He was a smart guy. You can't take that away from him. He was a gangster in every sense, but he was a little different in terms of getting his hands dirty, so to speak. And that's probably one of the biggest differences that you're going to hear when we talk about him. Now, really quickly, there is a question I typically get a lot, and it is in the questions, but I'm going to answer that now because I just feel like I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. First of all, people ask me all the time, what mob groups, what mob forums, what mob web pages do you go to? And the answer is I don't. Very rarely do I go to any other mob forums or mob pages, and there's a reason for that. It has, first of all, they all trash me, of course, right? So I don't particularly enjoy reading nasty stuff about me, considering that the majority of stuff that people say just isn't accurate in any stretch of the imagination. It's just people want to run their mouths, and this is one of those genres where everybody, can rightfully have an opinion, but there is a difference between having an opinion and getting something totally wrong and then basing your opinion on totally wrong information. So I typically stay away from majority of those sites. Every once in a while, I'll read a Jerry Capisci article on Gangland News just because there are facts in that most of the time. Other than that, I typically I stay away from a lot of those groups. Not because there's not good information, but there's a couple of sites in particular I really stay away from because it's all people gossiping, and it's people putting sometimes legitimate information out there, which I don't think they should be doing. That's just the way that I kind of roll. How I run my operation is a little different from everybody else. And it's not to say that other pages don't have their merits. I'm sure they do. I just typically don't enjoy those pages because it's a lot of backbiting, a lot of fuck you, a lot of your mother's a jerk off. It's a lot of that kind of stuff, especially when you disagree with somebody. So I typically just kind of shy away from that. Every once in a while, somebody will send me something from one of these websites, and I kind of got to laugh at some of the stuff they're saying. And sometimes it can be a little entertaining, but there is particularly one I absolutely stay away from, and it's run by the federal government. I'm not going to say who that is. I think that I've been pretty much on record in past shows saying which group that was. A lot of people have denied that and said that that's not true, but it is true because it got pulled up into a federal racketeering case where undercover FBI agents and undercover cops, undercover state police were actively posting on this website, and that information got dragged into a federal court case. So I stay the fuck away from that page for that reason. I just think that, and I think that I shouldn't be naive enough to think that it doesn't happen on Facebook, because it does. It happens on Instagram. The minute that you start down a certain narrative against the federal government or FBI, you're going to get put on a little list, and they're going to be watching close. And the other thing, too, is not everybody is going to be a casualty of people watching what they say, but I know that I am. I mean, that's just, that's not braggadocious, because believe me, that's not what I want. But I think when you're putting out real information, real stories, and it makes people look bad on the other side of it, you tend to get noticed. And that's, believe me, that's not what I want, but that has been the case for a couple of years. It's nothing new for me. So that's pretty much the answer to that one. Also, the paintings have been reduced. I will put in the link a description and a link to the page. We've dropped the prices on everything just so we can sell out everything we have. Paintings are being sold pretty much on a regular basis at this point. A lot of people are buying them, but we reduced the price just because I think that when you have an overabundance in something, it's better to just, give people a better deal and just kind of get it out. And so that's what we're doing. And I'll put a link to that page as well. As usual, you can follow us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. You can check us out on Facebook. Type in Mob Talk Radio. There we are. Give us a like. Give us a subscription or subscribe to us. Send your death threats and hate mail to the same places you always do. If you're looking for genre type of clothing and other stuff, you got to check out the Omerta guys. Go to their website at OMERTAMIA.com. You can get the Stop Glorifying Rats shirt, Intimidating All Witnesses shirts, all kinds of different stuff, stickers, hoodies, hats, jackets. They just really have everything, and I got a good deal with them. If you go to omertamia.com, you can type in Mob Talk in all caps, and you can get 10% off your purchase. Please go ahead and do that. You're going to save yourself a couple of bucks. I have a ton of their clothing. I have for 6 months now. They send me stuff all the time, and I give it away. I don't keep a lot of it. It's great stuff if you have the same sort of mentality that I do and other people do. Once again, go to Omerta, OMERTAMIA.com. Go to the webpage, check out the swag, and then type in Mob Talk, MOBTALK in all caps, and you'll get 10% off your purchase. Like I said, great clothing, great sort of log lines and gimmicks, and I think that if you have the same mentality I do and other people do, it's just a shirt, right? So if you like that kind of stuff, get yourself a discount. Just type in Mob Talk. I mean, who doesn't want a fucking discount? Other than that, that's really it. There is a little bit of news I was going to do, but I think I'm going to bypass that today just because we have such a large Q&A. And as far as the new webpage goes, because a lot of people are asking about this, we are definitely going to leave YouTube. I've pretty much told you that was going to be the case. There's a couple different companies I'm talking to right now that are thinking about taking my show. And if, like I said, if I can get my show to the point where I don't have to ask for a dime from anybody, then that's exactly what I'm trying to do. And that's been the real reason why there's such a delay. I'm trying to keep it free for everybody, but I don't think that's going to be a possibility. Everybody wants a kickback. So as we move forward, there's going to be some decisions that really need to be made here in the next month and a half or so. And I can just tell you off the bat, it's going to be like $5 a month, $4, $5 a month. That's it. You're going to get all the radio shows, an additional radio show. You're going to get documentary type of stuff, articles, breaking news, and etc. And so it's one of those things that I haven't wanted to do, but I almost have to at this point because YouTube is not allowing my monetization. I have some theories as to why that's happening. I find it hard to believe that you can show a cannibal video, but you can't say fuck and you can't talk about the mafia. Maybe it's because they get scared, but I think a lot of it is that the advertisers that they use for Facebook, they want to advertise certain products, and a lot of people shy away from the mob genre, and I get it, but it's still not stopping them from getting kickbacks from my stuff, and that's a little insulting. I work pretty hard for it. We've had over 1.3 million downloads, 28 million or 29 million minutes in downloads. So obviously the show is growing, and it just gets to the point where if I want to do stuff like giveaways and I want to like do special events and stuff like that, who's going to fund that? I'm going to have to find a way to do it. I've totally been against Patreon and accepting money per show. I'm just not going to do that. I think that in comparison to other sites that do half the work or a quarter of the work that I do, they're charging like $7. I'm not going to do that. It's not about getting rich. It's just about the overflow, and it's about being able to do special events, being able to like do live shows from different cities and stuff like that, which is the way that we are heading. I got a bunch of guests lined up, but I'm staggering them off till I can figure out whether or not we're going to do this a certain particular way. We are going to do live shows, live events. We are going to take callers, which is probably going to be the most entertaining shit north of the fucking east of the Mississippi, just because I know people are going to call in and fuck you and your mother, and I already know how that's going to go. But that's going to be probably entertaining, and we're looking at a couple of different ways of how to set that up. So all that being said, that's pretty much what we got going on. Yes, there is some Flanagan news, but we're not ready to release that as of yet. If you're unfamiliar with what the Flanagans is, Irish crime drama that is going to take place in Queens, filming on locations in Queens, New York. Probably going to film something in Philly as well. So other than that, that's pretty much what we got going on. Let's get to the questions because there's a lot of them. And once again, the rule always is, if I don't get to your question, it's not because I'm ignoring you. It's not because your question's dumb. It's because your question has been asked a million times, or it's one of those questions that it's too in-depth for me to answer in one sitting. And if it is a question typically like that, what I will do is I will bring it onto another show and I will expand on it as much as I can. So, with that being said, if I don't get to your question, don't kill me, just send death threats, because that's what you guys do. Listen, if I could make a book on the death threats that I get. Some of them are actually quite hysterical, to be honest with you. But, you know, you're not doing anything right if you don't have haters, so there you go. All right, you said that Al Capone was more of a gangster than mafia. Was the Chicago family mafia before what was... Okay, I got to restart that. You have said Capone was more gangster than mafia. Yes, I have said that. Was the Chicago family... what was the Chicago family like before him? Were they mafia? Did it... was it being more run as traditional mafia, et cetera, et cetera? What did the other bosses think of him? Listen, historically, the outfit began pretty much as street gangs, both on the south side and the north side of Chicago. And you did have the Black Hand and smaller fringe groups like that. The real first guy to come along, obviously, was Big Jim Colosimo, and he was really the first recognized boss, if there was such a thing in Chicago. Around 1909, he pretty much was taking it to everybody's ass, at least territory-wise, and he was encroaching on other territories, especially the turf that was owned and operated by the Black Hand. It was Colosimo's nephew, actually, Johnny Torrio, who really put the outfit together.
Little glitch there. Got to apologize for that. It was basically, looking back on it, it was actually Colosimo's nephew, Johnny Torrio, who really put the outfit together, as Torrio was brought in to help Big Jim. And through Johnny Torrio, Torrio brings Al Capone in from Brooklyn. There would be a split between Torrio and his Uncle Jim over rum running operations. Torrio knew that rum running would be the biggest profit for them at the time, and Big Jim felt it was a bad idea, wasn't worth the risk. But it was enough to push Torrio, who would actually have his Uncle Jim killed by bringing in Frankie Yale to handle business. Torrio then moved to push most of the criminal groups together, much like Luciano did. The outfit as we know it today, like we went from the more traditional route under Paul Rico. And that was really the first official recognized bosses of New York. Now, Al Capone was recognized by New York. He did have a seat on the commission. That is true. But I think in terms of what we're talking about traditionally, I think Paul Rico was really the first guy to come along and make it more Cosa Nostra than Al Capone. All right, do you think Harry Baney would have made a great boss? Absolutely not. I could talk about Harry Baney for a fucking year on this show. I'd rather not. Harry the Hunchback from Philly. But I don't think he would have made a good boss, no. I don't think he had the power. I don't think he had the strength. He took on Nicky Scarfo and pretty much fucking lost. So, that's just how it goes. All right, I've heard the Sicilian mob, the Calabrian mob, but what about the Abruzzi mob? Listen, every French group you could possibly imagine, Sicilians, Calabrians, Abruzzi, they all have different versions of the mob. I've talked extensively on this show about criminal groups over in Italy. The best thing I can suggest to you, only because if I get into this, we're going to be here all day. the best thing that I can suggest is just do your research. Go to Google, type in Italian Mafia in Italy. They'll pull up maps of where these clannish groups are located, and et cetera, and 'Ndrangheta, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, absolutely. The Abruzzi, the Calabrians, and the Sicilians, and it just gets the Milanese. There's just tons of groups. Everywhere you can imagine on the boot of Italy, they are there. All right, can you shed any light on the stuff going on in Baltimore? Baltimore, for the most part, is done. They had a relatively short shelf life. And I've heard over the years that some families had small representatives there, but not really anything that big. Likely more so just an association than anything. Baltimore famously had a crew which lasted from the 1920s till about the 1990s, which, is a good 70-year run. They had around 10 to 15 made guys, 50 or so associates, but they really became more of an extension of the Gambino crime family. But from what I understand, there are some fringe guys still there. But it's more holdovers than just anything. If you're looking for a more in-depth discussion about Baltimore, you got to go back a couple of shows, and I believe that I sort of gave the rundown of the Baltimore Mafia and its historical implications. All right. In your opinion, what was the biggest decision the commission ever made? Oh, that's a big one. I think really the biggest decision they ever had to make, obviously, was what to do with Joe Bonanno and narcotics trafficking. I think narcotics trafficking changed the way that the game was played. I think it changed the way that money came in. And I think that the stuff and the issues that they had with Joe Bonanno, especially when he wanted to take out Tommy Lucchese and Carlo Gambino and take over for himself, I think that was probably one of the bigger issues that they ever had to figure out. There's positives and negatives to all of that kind of stuff, but I think realistically, when you talk about the commission, we can talk pre-commission form with Luciano, and obviously going into Cuba would have been the biggest decision there, and along with drugs. But I think ultimately drugs is probably at the top, and what they had to decide and what they were going to do with Joe Bonanno. All right. Will Cosa Nostra align itself with the Mexican cartels as they continue to move towards the drug trade? I'm assuming they have brushed shoulders in the past. It's already sort of happened, but not with the American Mafia, but more so to the Italians in Italy. It's mainly the Zetas and the Gulf Cartel who have business relationship with 'Ndrangheta, which sort of encompasses the Coluccio and the Aquino families in New York and the Shrippa family in Calabria. The main reason is that the Mexicans, and the reason, what I'm talking about here is the main reason why the Mexicans have sort of established those ties with Italians in that sense is because they needed inroads to Europe. If you look at the numbers of cocaine usage in the United States, it's dropped by 68%. However, Europe's usage of cocaine is up, and the revenue alone in 2009, I think something was like $33 billion just in Europe alone. The cost of drugs has gone down because the Mexican cartels are now manufacturing, which is cutting the cost. And by using 'Ndrangheta and other groups, they are cutting out the middlemen in Colombia and using old mafia shipping routes. So if you're manufacturing drugs, you're automatically not getting it anymore from Corsica. You're not getting it from Afghanistan. You're manufacturing the shit. So if you're manufacturing, you're cutting costs. Granted, manufacturing can be costly and expensive, but that's why I think you've seen Mexican cartels in general get involved with them, because they got to cut out the middleman to save money. The other difference is historically, 'Ndrangheta hasn't had your typical informants, and Mexican cartels realize this. Colombia has always had a problem with rats and informants, and I think that the Mexican cartels can trust 'Ndrangheta and the Sicilians over in Italy a lot more, because the past is that Italians don't talk over there. Here, a little different of a story, but I think that what it does is it removes Colombia as a middleman, so to speak, and it allows dealing with Ndrangheta easier and a lot safer in the long haul. It's also worth noting that Ndrangheta controls the harbor and ports in Calabria, which is one of the most important ports in Europe because a lot of opiates and opium come from Afghanistan through the ports in Corsica and into Calabria. And so if the Ndrangheta has Calabria on lockdown in the ports, it also makes sense for the cartels to use them. And this goes back historically. If you really want to get deep into it, this goes back historically through Lucky Luciano because they're using the same trafficking routes that they used in the old days. So not much has really changed from that perspective, but that's basically how I can answer that. All right, if you want to keep it 100%, the meeting at Appalachian, fuck the mafia. After that, that was completely the downfall, in my opinion. You know what? I agree, but I don't, and here's why I don't agree. The first thing is Appalachian happens, okay? So we can talk, but we've talked about Appalachian a million times on my show. I don't think that was the biggest problem. Granted, it put a face on something, but you still can't prove a face. Just because there's different cars with different license plates, different faces, doesn't mean something truly exists. It's what Joe Valachi did is what made it a bigger fucking problem because they may have had all the dots, but Valachi connected the fucking dots, and that's the big problem. Now, Valachi, in my opinion, was one of the biggest rats to ever fucking exist. He connected the dots for the government, and the minute he connected the dots, the FBI and those that were like trying to keep the mafia quiet for whatever reason no longer could, especially J. Edgar Hoover, could no longer use his catchphrase of this group doesn't exist, you're out of your fucking mind. The minute that happened, J. Edgar Hoover had no choice. So Valachi, to me, in my opinion, was a bigger fucking disgrace than the actual Appalachian event itself. All right, what else do we have? If Salvi Testa didn't get clipped by Nicky Scarfo, would he eventually have reached the level of boss? If he made it to boss, would he eventually have been respected by Merlino guys, or would he have been at odds with them as well? All right. No, I don't think he would have ever reached the level of boss. I don't think. First of all, Scarfo killed. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and I don't want to get into the totality of it, but there were a couple things. First of all, Nicky Scarfo was a paranoid schizophrenic about everybody. If anybody got to the limelight or if anybody was looking like they were going to gain a lot of power, he killed them. That's the way Nicky Scarfo ran. He killed Salvi Testa because Salvi Testa was getting too big. Not that Salvi Testa was walking the streets and was somebody like that, but Scarfo looked at him as a fucking threat. What Scarfo did was he used the marriage between Salvi Testa and Joey Merlino's sister, which didn't work out. The Salvi Testa got cold feet, took off. That insulted Joey's father. And that was a big problem. And that was all the leverage that Nicky Scarfo needed to get rid of Salvi Testa. There's a saying in that, if you got a personal beef with somebody or you're afraid they're a threat to your throne, you want to kill them, but you also want to keep everybody around you in a certain kind of mindset that we have to do this because it's good for business. All he needed was a more of a personal issue, and he used that to his advantage. With Joey Merlino's sister infuriating everybody. It's a disrespectful thing. And Nicky Scarfo was looking for a reason. Nicky Scarfo was given a reason. But you really can't say he would have eventually been respected by the Merlino guys because they're not the ones that had the beef with him originally. This was a Scarfo issue. And there was a split between Scarfo and Merlino and et cetera. And we've talked about that a lot on this show. But had Salvi Testa married his sister, would that have been a different scenario? Sure, but we can't really play out that scenario because it didn't happen. But I don't think Salvi Testa would have been, especially the way everything happened, with with Salvi's dad, and then the shit with Scarfo, the shit with Bruno, and everything that just kind of came after the fact. Then John Stanfa gets placed in by the New York mob, and you know, Merlino's crew takes it to his ass like you've never seen. And, you know, fat fuck Ron Previty, bring me Solo and the Wookiee. Sorry, a lot of people love it when I do this. I fucking hate Ron Previty, but I just love making fun of him. And if you don't understand when I say, bring me Solo and the Wookiee, that's a Jabba the Hutt reference. A lot of people didn't get that. So there's your little Ron Previty fucking thing. All right, I heard Capone had a seat in the commission, and I thought Capone was never a made guy. Here's the thing. As far as Capone being a made guy, there's been arguments to and for this. I don't believe that he necessarily wasn't. I don't believe that he necessarily was. There's an argument from the literate type of people where they say there's no way he would have ever been able to do anything if he wasn't made. He was made in Brooklyn. But there really isn't any evidence to like totally suggest that. And so was he on the commission? Absolutely he was. Did he have a final say in anything? No. They pretty much let Al Capone do what Al Capone wanted to do in Chicago. But he was also subservient to New York in a way that what was good for business was good for business. But if you think that Al Capone was going to walk in and tell the commission what to do, you're out of your fucking mind. It's just not the case. And when I say these things, it's not to detract or to make Al Capone look soft or weak. Al Capone was a totally different monster and a totally different type of machine, and not so much the traditionalist. Doesn't make him not gangster, doesn't make him not tough. He is. He's all of them things. But he just is different in terms of that. All right, why was Greg Scarpa's son, Joey, killed? Over drugs. Joey Shiro and Patrick Porco were pretty much selling drugs, and they were feuding with other dealers, mainly Dominic Massaria, Shiro, Porco, and Ray Aviles. I think that's Aviles. Were partners, and the war sort of gets escalated by the three of them killing Massaria. Massaria was involved with the crime family at the time, and the penalty for killing him would mean Shiro would have to be killed. Greg Scarpa would end up sending his son and Porco out of town to hide them because the mistake that they made was really going to come back to haunt them, but unfortunately they end up coming back to Brooklyn. Aviles ends up getting arrested, and then Porco gets arrested and sort of becomes an informant, and he's going to testify against Joey. And this was according to the information supplied by Lynn Del Vecchio, Scarpa's FBI handler, which you can take as a fucking grain of salt. But then Greg Scarpa orders his son to kill Porco, which he actually does. Eventually, Joey would be shot and killed in a botched drug deal. But we could probably conclude that it was likely retribution. All right, what mob sites or forums? Okay, we've already answered that question, so we can go past that. All right, it's widely suggested that Joey Gallo and either one of his brothers or Carmine Persico were the gunmen who blew Albert Anastasia away at the Park Sheridan Hotel. I have since read that out-of-town gunners from Providence and Boston were involved. What is your take on this? I can tell you for 100% Providence was not involved. It was Carmine Persico, it was Joey Gallo, and Albert Gallo. Those were the three shooters. That's exactly the way it went down. And you know, we've talked about the reason why Anastasia was hit. It was set up by Genovese and set up by Carlo Gambino. And a lot of the reasons for that is Gambino realized very early at his age, he said, you know, me and Albert Anastasia are about the same age. If this guy has any incredible run, I'm going to be 90 years old if I ever get to take over. And so he moved, and he had the backing of Genovese because Genovese needed help with Costello and all that crazy shit, and taking over what was at the time the Luciano crime family. So there you go. That's what I believe it to be. I know other people are going to say other things, but that is the most realistic answer. I don't know where the Providence and Boston stuff comes from. I could tell you for 100% certainty, sitting here right now, Providence was not involved in that. And also, you got to say, if Providence wasn't involved, Boston definitely wasn't, because Providence controlled Boston at the time. All right, I heard Chicago pays a street tax to New York. Is that true? I don't think so. If so, why is it? And why do other families, and do other families in the country pay a tax? To my knowledge, they don't. Why would they need to? They operate Chicago, Indiana, et cetera, Midwest. Why would they need to pay a kickback to New York? The only kickback that ever went from Chicago back to New York was Vegas. As far as other rackets, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, why give Al Capone a family and then say, by the way, you're going to kick back 30% of everything? It's not true. There may be some construction projects that they have tied together. Their partner did. But really, to my knowledge, the only thing Chicago ever had to kick back towards New York was the skim from Vegas. And that was like Kansas City was involved, New York, Florida. Everybody was involved in that, even Providence. So, to my knowledge, that's it. I could be wrong, but it wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you. All right. Barring killing Ronald Jethro and Billy Batts, do you think Tommy DeSimone would have gotten his button, or would he have been seen too much of a hothead to get made? Tommy DeSimone never would have been made. I don't think under any circumstances that would have happened. I think he was too loose. He was a drug addict. He just really was off his rocker. And a lot of people, when they think of Tommy DeSimone, Tommy Two Guns, they're thinking of, Goodfellas. Goodfellas is completely one of the more inaccurate historical film. Well, it's not even a historical film, for fuck's sakes. But it's not historically accurate in any sense of the imagination. They made Tommy DeSimone like a real big tough guy. Obviously, Joe Pesci played that character. But the real tough guy of that group was Jimmy Burke. He was the tough guy of that group. A lot of people have made more out of Tommy DeSimone than really needs to be. But that's it. I think at the end of the day, I think Tommy just outlived his usefulness. His penchant for violence was way too much. I mean, and that's the reality of it. People still think that Tommy was totally responsible for killing Billy Batts, whose real name was William Benvena. And what a lot of people don't understand is, they say, go get your fucking shine box. Well, the truth is that never happened. This issue was an issue because Jimmy Burke took over William Benvena's rackets when he went to prison. He was gone a long time. Jimmy made these rackets very, very profitable for Paul Vario and the Gambino crime family and other crime families. And when Benvena gets out of fucking prison, he decides, I want my fucking rackets back. And he goes and complains about Jimmy Burke. And what does Jimmy Burke do? Jimmy Burke fucking kills him. And the reason why the mob doesn't react to that is because it's over money. Jimmy Burke was making them a ton of fucking money. Jimmy Burke was honorable. Jimmy Burke was quiet. Jimmy Burke did what Jimmy Burke had to do. And so the mob wasn't about to get into like some sort of war with some guy that's been in prison for fucking 15 years. He made those rackets profitable. And so Jimmy killed him. Why Tommy took the total shithead blame for that? I think a lot of that's because Jimmy Burke blamed Tommy. But Jimmy Burke could have come right out and said, I fucking killed him. What are you going to do? And I don't think anything would have been done. But that's the reality. I would love to put out a book of everything that Goodfellas got wrong. Now, it's a great film as far as violence goes. I think it's the most realistic. But I think we're also taking Henry Hill's word for it. That's kind of a fucking mistake. Henry Hill was a fucking nobody who tried to make himself somebody in that film. And sort of that's that. All right. Who was the bartender that led the FBI agent to steal his keys so the government could wiretap where John Gotti held meetings? I've never even heard. Oh, and could you do a few Ron Previty impersonations? Joey Merlino and George Anastasia. I'm a fat fuck. I like lying. I'm a dirty, filthy cop. Anyway. Is that cheese on my belly or lint? What is that? Let me give it a taste. Yep, that's cheese. That's the first time I've heard anything. The bartender and an FBI agent to steal his keys, they didn't need to do that. They wiretapped John Gotti very easily by having informants fucking tell them where they were at. They were in an apartment. They were using a hallway outside the Ravenite. The FBI didn't need to steal keys to get in there. They simply were able to get in by lock picking because they knew where Gotti was meeting. They put in wires and the rest is history. That's the first time I've ever heard an FBI agent stealing keys. That doesn't make sense to me at all, because an agent wouldn't have been able to get that close to anybody remotely related to John Gotti. I think what you may be getting confused about is Donnie Brasco. Or even how the Lufthansa heist kind of went down. You may be getting confused. I could be wrong. But that's the first time I've ever heard that. All right. Oh, boy. Who were some of the players on the Scarfo side where Merlino was going at him? Joey Merlino, if that's who we're talking about. I don't know if we're talking about him or his father, but Joey never really directly went after Nicky Scarfo. It was, you got to understand, I hate this question. It's a good question, but I just hate it because it pushes me to go somewhere I don't want to go. But the reality is this, okay, is that Nicky Scarfo was doing whatever Nicky Scarfo was doing. He ends up going to fucking prison, okay? He attempts to run shit from prison, and some shit goes down. His son gets shot at, etc., etc., then he puts his son in the Lucchese crime family to try to insulate him. And then John Stanfa comes. When John Stanfa comes, that's when the shit begins, and that's when the Merlino side of things took it to Stanfa's ass like you have no fucking idea. Like, I wish they would make a movie just on that part of the Philadelphia time period, because to me it's like, all right, you want to send this prick here? We're going to show him how things are really done. We're going to be fucking gangsters. And they were fucking gangsters. Don't get it twisted. That was some gangster shit that went on in those days. But to really say that it was Joey Merlino going right after Nicky Scarfo really isn't that accurate. There was not good feelings between them. But you got to understand Joey's age, too. There was probably a bigger beef between Joey Merlino's father and Nicky Scarfo, and then Joey Merlino, obviously loving his father and wanting to protect his father, doesn't like Scarfo either. But there really wasn't, like, if you think Joey Merlino is riding around with a gun looking for Nicky Scarfo, that's not the case. The real issue came with John Stanfa, who had no business being in Philadelphia to begin with, was sent there by New York because they were trying to control the powder keg. And so the minute that the fucking war starts with Stanfa, Merlino, and etc., New York throws their fucking hands up and says, well, let's let these boys handle it their way, because you get in the way, you're going to get killed. You get in the way, you're going to get fucking killed. And Stanfa would have made Mickey Mouse. He would have fucking inducted a fucking jerk-off with 3 tits and 4 eyes if he thought that this guy was capable of whacking Joey Merlino or anybody else. But let the truth be told, who won that? Who was more gangster in that situation? The fucking old school Sicilian, or fucking Joey, the South Philly king? So I think the reality is, I think that Stanfa underestimated who he was fucking dealing with, and that's absolutely true. And that's what amazes me, is throughout the years nobody really talks about that. And to me, that's like some gangland shit. That's the shit I want to see made into a movie, because to me, if you ain't scared enough to take it to somebody's ass and you don't care about the ramifications, because it's all about survival and it's all about taking what the fuck is yours, you can't get more gangster than that. And that's just my opinion on it. Other people may think differently. I'm sure people do. I'm sure people think differently than me. But, I tend to like real gangsters and not punks. So I think that would be really, really interesting. Not only that, but that fucking pig, Ron Previty, he tried to nail Merlino and all them guys by fucking flipping the script, and he failed on every fucking level to try to put Joey in charges. So that should tell you the validity of that fucking fat piece of shit. Ugh. See, I love talking about Philly because it's the closest thing you're going to get to like some like old school shit. You know, granted, it's New Day shit and guys using machine guns, whatever the fuck else. If you're into the gangster stuff, that's gangster shit. I don't care what anybody fucking says. You can chastise somebody for getting their picture taken. You can chastise somebody for fucking talking to a reporter. You can do that all day long. But at the end of the day, if you're willing to pick up a fucking machine gun and put somebody in their fucking place, you a fucking gangster. That's the reality of it. That's the reality of it. And maybe that says that I'm a little fucked up, maybe. I don't know. There's one day we'll talk about the large differences between New York and Philadelphia, and I can tell you one right here. The biggest difference that I think I can say from any personal experience dealing with, not even dealing with, but just personality, South Philly. First of all, what people don't know about me is I lived in South Philly for a while. You know, I had Eagles season tickets with my brother. I love South Philly. I always have loved Philadelphia. I love what they stand for. I love the personalities. I love the go fuck you and your mother, I'll knock your teeth out mentality. I like it. It's old school. And I think that whatever people's opinions may be outside, if you've never been there and you don't understand the pulse and the way people are, you'll never understand it. You could say, they're a bunch of fucking animals. They throw fucking batteries. They boo Santa Claus. Yeah, they do all that shit. But, you know, they expect a certain team to perform or whatever. New York people are the bigger animals when it comes to sports. I'm telling you right now. They're more rude than Philadelphia is. Either that or maybe I just fit in there a little better. I always have. But there is a familial, and when I say familial, it's something very strange. I look back to when I was a kid in Rhode Island, and even here in New York, the way that family is, the way that you treat people, the way that you look, the way that you interact with people. One of the biggest things I look back as a child, and maybe a lot of you do too, is you walk in the room and your grandfather makes you feel loved the instant you walk in the room. And even people who are like your second and third cousins or cousins of cousins who maybe you don't even know, they always treat you like you're a part of the family when you're there. They treat you with respect. They treat you like they give a shit. That's South Philly. I don't care what anybody says. People may not understand that, but what I've always said and what I will always say is you cannot crack a fucking wall whose foundation is built in steel, trust, honor, and loyalty for 30 fucking years. You can't crack it. That's why they can't. That's why they never fucking will. And there is a loyalty there that a lot of people just don't fucking get. Sure, a lot of people talk and gossip, but that's like everywhere else. But the difference is when people treat you with respect, there's a lot to be said for that. And it reminds me of when I was a kid with my family. And that's why I think I'm so attached to the pulse there. Because I can respect people that stick together through thick and thin and say, fuck it, bring it. That's a mentality that I can get down with every day. And I think that's why I don't badmouth them. There's no point to. I couldn't badmouth anybody there. I really couldn't, except for Nicky Scarfo and fat fuck Ron Brevity and John Vesey and all them jerk-offs. But I think it would be interesting to see a film or a documentary about Philly that was legit gangster and not just like some fucking narrative of Anastasia jerking himself off in the woods while fucking Ratweiser sits there with a cracker in his hand. That's just my opinion. Okay, has there ever been infighting amongst the five families? Has other families fought against other families in New York? Sure, there's always infighting. There's always bickering, but it's always about business and money. Back in the 60s, it may have been, you clip this guy, so we're clipping one of your guys. We've seen that before, but there's always infighting. Everybody always wants to make more money, yeah? So I think at the end of the day, any disagreement or any personality conflicts are going to be based around money. These days, anyway. And so, yeah, of course, there's always been infighting. Look at the Bonanos. They've been infighting since Joe Bonanno was boss. The Profacis had the same fucking problem. The Gambino, fucking coffee. The Gambino family had the same kind of problem. So yeah, I mean there is fighting and infighting, but it's usually over turf and it's usually over money, construction rackets, and etc. But look at Philadelphia; they've had infighting before, so this is nothing new. Every crime family has their own thing. All right, based on an article I read, a new A few informants in Boston and other places have left Witsec and went back to the areas that they are from. I know you said the mob doesn't kill anymore, but how is it that even close to being possible? And I'm guessing the question is about these rats. They go into Witsec, they come out of Witsec, and they go right back to the neighborhood. Listen, I don't get it. I've never understood it, but I think historically everything changes. History always repeats itself. Let me remind you of that. We've seen hits, obviously, here in New York in the last 6 months. But I think, first of all, a rat that comes back into the community in which he ratted, a lot of people are going to be hesitant to go near the guy because they're automatically going to think he's still fucking an informant. And you got to understand, these guys still have federal protection. They can leave Witsec, but if you think they're still not talking to FBI handlers, you're out of your fucking mind. Majority of these guys get paychecks for the rest of their fucking life. It's not just like, okay, well, here's $5 grand, here's 10 grand, okay, good luck to you. They pay these guys for life. Anything they need, they fucking get. And so what happens is these fucking rats, they get out, they do their illegal shit, they get away with it because they say to the FBI, I'm going to do some illegal shit, but I'm going to give you A, B, C, and D, and that'll further your fucking career. And that's how it goes down. And that's why they get pretty much whatever they want. And that's why they can go back into these areas. Because guys aren't willing to take it to their ass, because in many cases these informants go back 25 years. Well, everybody they ratted out is gone. And yeah, there's always one young buck or one fucking nutcase in a bunch that's going to be willing to take it to his ass and fill his fucking brain with fucking lead. But the reality is that nobody wants to take a pinch no more, right? And so I just think the most important thing that you can take from that is the fact that these guys likely are still rats, still informants, and nobody's going to go near them. Now, if he gets hit by a fucking bread truck, hey, who the fuck cares? Champagne for fucking everybody. But I think the reality of somebody driving up and popping 3 in somebody's head over that, these days, they would have to do some really seriously egregious shit, in my opinion. All right. Do you think the outfit still has a crew in Vegas? Absolutely. I don't think Chicago ever left Vegas. I don't think that fucking Kansas City ever left Vegas. There's always going to be fringe groups wherever. But the idea that the mob runs Vegas, they don't control the unions there anymore, and that was the biggest thing. And Vegas is all corporations now. Now, there may be a corporation or two that could be a front, but I think the reality of that is probably zero. All right. Oh, boy. Are the Chang brothers in Philadelphia the worst brother against brother you have ever seen? Listen, you know what? Things are things. Things happen. Is that the worst thing that I've ever seen, the Chang brothers going against each other? No, you should see me and my fucking brother. We fucking hate each other like you got no idea. But we're not throwing bullets at each other. That's the difference. I'd throw a fucking bat or a fucking rock or a brick, but not bullets. I don't hate them that much. But anyway. All right, what started the Costello-Galante beef? All right, Costello was basically against dealing drugs. And the way that Galante just sort of killed people at will really infuriated Costello. And you also have to understand that Costello was aligned with Lucchese and Gambino, and they were against the Bonanos at the time, which by all accounts, Carmine Galante loved Joe Bonanno like crazy, and Galante also knew that Gambino, with Costello, Luciano, and Lansky, had effectively set up Vito Genovese to take a pinch for the rest of his life, and Galante was fucking infuriated, and that's really where it came from. But also keep in mind that Genovese was sent away in 59, I think, and then Galante was sent away in 61. So there's been this conspiracy that not only did they fuck Genovese in his ass, but they put fucking Galante in prison too. In 61. Galante would blame Costello for the entire thing, since Costello had been really a loud opponent of Galante. So that's where the beef got started. He blamed him for the Bonanno thing. He blamed him for the Genovese thing, and that's sort of how it went. All right. Did Meyer Lansky die broke? Some people say he had money stashed away, but it's never been found. If you believe that, I got a bridge in fucking Brooklyn to sell you. I got a Walt Whitman's for sale over here. No, Meyer Lansky had around $400 to $500 million when he died. He dispersed it in a lot of different ways. So for the Lansky family to say that there was no money is bullshit. Now, Meyer Lansky did take a fucking beating and lost probably close to like $30 or $40 million when the Cuba shit happened. But Meyer Lansky certainly did not die broke. If he did, that would really listen to what we're talking about here. Meyer Lansky was like the mob's fucking accountant, the business guru behind the money. You really think that guy didn't save any money? He wasn't a fucking degenerate gambler. He wasn't a fucking drug addict. He didn't own a million fucking properties. You really think that guy went broke? You really think he went broke? Come on. Get out of here. All right. There is a rat pasta eating contest between Pete Chiodo, Joey Massino, and Ron Previty. Who wins? Ron Previty wins. Ron Previty wins. A mouth on that fucking guy. Yeah, Ron Previty would definitely. He's got like 5 stomachs, that prick. All right. Is the mob still active in Cleveland? 100%. Go back a couple of shows. I talk a little bit about Cleveland, especially maybe the Danny Green show. All right. If Luciano and Lansky were so as close as people say, why did Lansky not just run his rackets and help Luciano more, or was it the case of, you're out and I need to look after my own business? Lansky helped Luciano's whole entire life. He wasn't the only one. Joe Adonis also helped Luciano. Frank Sinatra also helped Luciano. Luciano ran out of fucking money. Once Luciano was done and is exiled over into Italy, Joe Adonis was still helping him out financially, but the minute that Joe Adonis starts running out of money himself, Luciano gets all pissed because Joe Adonis won't take care of his finances. So I don't think necessarily that Lansky looked out for him as much as he could, but there's a certain point where Lansky has to move on and take care of his own business dealings and etc. But he went well out of his way to always try to take care of Luciano. Everybody did, but the reality is Luciano didn't save money. Once he was out, he wasn't getting the kickbacks that he used to get, and that's sort of the reality of it. And there you go. All right, let's see. All right, let's go to this one. In your opinion, out of 3, who was the baddest of the bad, or was there somebody else I'm missing? Here goes my list. Greg Scarpa, Gaspipe Casso, and Iceman Richard Kuklinski. All right. Here we go again. Richard Kuklinski was not in the mafia. Richard Kuklinski was not a mob hitman. Richard Kuklinski was a fucking serial killer. There has been no evidence to prove Richard Kuklinski had any fucking dealings with the mafia. In fact, the FBI looked into all of that. He failed his polygraph, and they could not verify anything that he said. The only thing Richard Kuklinski, first of all, Richard Kuklinski met Roy DeMeo when Kuklinski was bootlegging the porn tapes, the porn movies. DeMeo walked in and pistol whipped him, beat the hell out of him, and said, nope, I'm taking this over, and that's how it happened. Roy DeMeo didn't ask him to kill for him. Roy DeMeo didn't need to do that. Why is he going to go to some dumb fucking Pollock from fucking New Jersey when he's got Anthony Center, Joey Testa, the fucking Dracula Guglielmetti? He's got all them guys. He's got Chris Rosenberg. He doesn't need fucking Richard Kuklinski. So take Richard Kuklinski off your list, and I'm going to add one. Let's see. You got Greg Scarpa, Gaspipe Castle, Tommy Patera. Tommy Patera was not a guy you wanted to fuck with on any level. In fact, I would almost be willing to tell you Tommy Patera was probably more dangerous than the other two in certain ways, so to speak. All right. Oh, a hockey question. This ought to be good. NHL playoffs, your predictions. So let's see. In the first round, you got Tampa and Columbus. Tampa in 5. No way Tampa's going to lose that series. The Penguins and the Islanders. Well, the Pens lost last night, but I still think the Pens will win in 6. We got the Blues and Jets. I think the Jets are going to take that in 6. Maple Leafs and Bruins. Bruins in 7. Vegas and Sharks. I'm going to take the Sharks in 6. Stars and Predators. Predators in 6, Canes and Capitals. Capitals in fucking 6. I'm going to say 6. Avalanche and the Flames in 5. But I wonder if Tampa Bay can really sustain a long playoff run, because I think that when a team, I think they finished with 124 points, only lost like fucking 10 games or some crazy shit. I think when you sit at the top of the NHL and the top of the division all year long, I think once you hit the playoffs, you hit that stride and you've had it fairly easy, I think it makes it really hard.
I think it just makes it really hard. And you know what? There may be. I think I got to interrupt my show. I think there's probably going to be a bit of this where the octave changes. There was some kind of short in my system. I don't know, but I can't go back and fix 55 minutes, so just deal with it. I apologize for the change in tone or whatever. But when it comes to Tampa Bay, if you haven't had a year of ups and downs, no emotional stuff to go into a season, I think sometimes you can get beat up pretty quickly. And I think the first team that really comes along and matches them check for check, keeps them stuck in their own end, it beats up on them physically, is probably going to do pretty well. So Tampa may likely make the Stanley Cup Finals. I just don't see them winning the Stanley Cup. I just don't. Okay. Why did Paul Castellano allow Roy DeMeo's crew to act uncontrollably, especially when he had a deal and die rule? We're going to talk a little bit about Roy DeMeo when it comes to Paul Castellano here in the second half of the show, and that'll explain it more. So let me just pass that question on to the back half. If Castellano hadn't have been whacked, I think he would have probably died in prison, and Gotti would have still taken out Bellotti. I don't think he would have needed to take out Tommy Bellotti if Paul went away. It just depends. If Paul goes to prison and he tries to run it from prison, and Bellotti, maybe you're right. I think there definitely still would have been a power struggle. I don't think he would have had to have taken out Bellotti. I don't think Bellotti would have had enough power on his own to take it over, and he would have been overthrown, and maybe not necessarily through murder. All right, did the feds know Gotti was behind the Castellano hit right away, or did they just assume? Well, I think they assumed a lot of it, and I think the fact that John Gotti pretty much had a celebration in his own honor pretty shortly after pretty much tells you everything. That and the FBI already had informants, so there you go. All right, what was the deal between the black heroin dealers, Frank Matthews, Nicky Barnes, and Frank Lucas, and La Cosa Nostra? Which families, if any, supplied and controlled them? And how did this work? Did Galante deal with them directly, or did he just supply directly? Okay, couple of things we have to get out of the way, and I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. In the case of Frank Matthews, he pretty much approached the Gambinos and the Managano Crime Family, much like Virgil Sollozzo did from the Godfather movies, and basically the mob passed on his ideas. They didn't want anything to do with them. They had their operation running. And so basically what Matthews does is he ends up going to the Cuban Mafia, specifically Rolando Gonzalez Nunez, and that relationship is what solidified Matthews in the drug market. The mistake that Matthews makes, though, is that he brings major African-American drug dealers and Hispanic cartel members to a summit in Atlanta in about 1971, and the whole crux of that meeting was that he wanted to remove the mafia from the drug trade. The mafia at the time had all the importation routes, and Matthews wanted to bypass the mafia, and he wanted to deal directly with the Corsicans and the Cubans. The issue was not only was Matthews attempting to bypass the Italians, but he was attempting to steal drug routes and basically use the middleman that the mafia had been using forever. Matthews would end up getting arrested in Las Vegas in 1973. And he got bail, and while he was out on bail, he took $20 million and was never seen again. My suspicion is that he's dead. Nicky Barnes, on the other hand, worked more specifically with the mafia. It's well known that Joey Gallo taught Nicky Barnes how to organize his faction. Barnes was a well-known drug dealer, but he really didn't have a system in place where he could organize and insulate himself from the prying eyes of the DEA, the FBI, and etc. And it really was Joey Gallo who instilled in him the idea to organize himself, have a structure to everything, know where the money's being kicked up, and stay off the radar. Nicky Barnes would also work with Matty Madonna, but like all stories, Barnes becomes a fucking rat. As far as Frank Lucas goes, this guy gets so much street credit, but his whole story The majority of his story is absolute bullshit and lies. For starters, his claims of driving Bumpy Johnson, it's not really truthful. He makes claims that he was with Bumpy Johnson for 15 years, blah, blah, blah. No, the reality is probably like 4 years. According to Johnson's widow, she said that the man who was really close to Bumpy Johnson was Zach Walker, not Frank Lucas. Lucas also understood that if he was ever going to compete with other traffickers, he too would have to work his way around the mafia. He did go to Thailand, but he did not procure cocaine using bodies and caskets. They literally fucking hid the cocaine in furniture. So the story of him going over to Vietnam and all, it's all bullshit. Don't believe any of it. Those are lies Lucas has told over the years. When Lucas first began his enterprise, he was forced to purchase narcotics from the mob, who basically stepped on the product a million times. Lucas did end up getting drugs from Thailand, and that was a great innovation in and of itself, but the DEA and other law enforcement agencies don't believe any statements about him or his net worth. He claims that he made, $52 million. That's grossly exaggerated, and his claims of money being hidden in the Cayman Islands and banks has never been proven. It's also been suggested that Lucas snitched on Nicky Barnes and many others that he was working against and worked in tandem with the FBI for years before his arrest. He would then become a certified rat, and that's that. So of all those three, Nicky Barnes was really the guy that had the connections. Frank Lucas is full of shit, and Frank Matthews was basically couldn't work his way around the mafia, and we know how that ends. All right. If Paul Castellano had gone to Neil's funeral, would he have lived? No. I don't think if he had gone to the funeral, he was going to live. There was too much in play, too many problems with the tapes, and if you listen to the second part of my show, we're going to get into that. If Henry Hill never ratted on Burke or Paul Vario, what would have happened to Jimmy since he was caught selling drugs? Nothing. Who's going to kill Jimmy Burke? Everybody was making a ton of money with Jimmy Burke. Nobody was going to kill Jimmy Burke. So I don't think anything would have happened. I think it would have just been business as usual. Jimmy Burke sure as fuck wouldn't have gone to fucking prison. All right, you covered the Joey Merlino trial perfectly, and you called it from day one for the most part. My question is, are you going to Philip Narducci's trial, and what do you think the result will be with him, knowing what has been reported and knowing what you know about the FBI and misconduct and other things? No, I'm not going to Philip's trial. There's no reason for me to be there. I think I've spoken at length about what the truth is. The truth is going to be very clear. It already is. In my opinion, Philip's going to walk. He should walk. He's done nothing wrong. And that's the end of it. That's the end of it. The guy did nothing wrong. He's going to walk. He's going to come home. They're going to throw a big party, and the rest is going to be history. That's my opinion of it. What actually happens, I'm not sure. But no, I don't have any plans to go to that. I don't think I do him a service by being there. I don't think I do anybody a service by being there. If I do, that people will tell me. But I just think that I'm a distraction. This guy is really fighting for his life at his age, and with the penalties of what he's being allegedly accused of, that could be a fucking life sentence for him. So, this guy's fighting for his life. The last thing he needs is my big mouth sitting there making a fucking a show out of something. He doesn't need that, and so I'm going to respect him in the situation by staying the fuck away from it. All right, do you think Big Paul would have turned informant in the commission case? Nah, Paul would have taken it on the chin and would have ended up doing life in prison. I don't think Paul would have talked. I don't think he was that kind of guy. All right, was the way Chicago operated the same as New York families? After Paul Rica came around, actually before Paul Rica, I think it started to really operate and functionally like that under Frank Nitti. And Paul Rica and Sam Giancana. That's when that started. Why do we never hear of the internal power struggles or wars? Well, you got to tune it in to where you need to find that. There's tons of stuff on Netflix about the Chicago mob where they talk about a lot of internal wars. You got the Calabrese bullshit, the family bullshit there. Was Chicago more organized, or were they as big as any New York families? Absolutely, they were big. Absolutely, they're big. Listen, when you control politics and unions, you control everything, right? Go back to when Sam Giancana was sort of the boss. The Chicago mob was insanely strong then. They're never going to be like that again. When you control unions, you control politics, you control everything. And that's the truth. Chicago is very strong today. Is there a difference? Sure, of course there is. There's always a difference. Times change, history changes, and etc. But yeah, for the most part, there were inner struggles and wars in Chicago, obviously. They were definitely very well organized and more traditionally like New York families back in the 60s. But times change. Times change. There's a reason why you don't hear a lot about Chicago. And this is the clue that I give to people when they say to me, who's big, who's doing this? If you don't hear about them, they're building. There you go. All right, those are going to be all the questions we got for today. Sorry about the glitch in the fucking sound. I don't know what the fuck is going on with this thing. This computer some days wants to jerk me off, the other days it wants to slap me in the face. I don't know how it works. Anyway, we are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we are going to get to the one and only Paul Castellano. Stay tuned on Mob Talk Radio. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are going to be talking about Paul Castellano. Some things you may find surprising, some things maybe not, but we're going to cover everything in between. All right. So with that, Constantino Paul Castellano was born in June of 1915 in Brooklyn, New York, to Joe Castellano and Conchetta Cassato. Paul's father was a butcher by trade, and he was an early member of the Managano Crime Family, which was the Gambinos before they obviously became the Gambinos. By most accounts, Paul was not very book smart and struggled in school, and he would end up quitting school in the 8th grade and would begin training to be a butcher. He also got involved with the numbers racket, collecting receipts for his father. It was also his father who would instruct him in the early days how to be a butcher and how to collect numbers receipts. In July of 1934, Paul would be arrested for the first time in Connecticut for robbing a haberdasher. While driving through Connecticut, Paul and two friends decided to rob a store. The problem was they tried to rob a store that really didn't have a whole lot of money, and the owner of the store was able to identify them, and he basically goes to the police. Paul and his two associates would be arrested for the crime, and at trial, Paul refused to identify his two accomplices and would end up serving 3 months in prison for refusing to cooperate. That deed in and of itself brought him street credit and earned him the respect of many street guys. The Castellanos were long entrenched into the mafia and had a huge hold on different rackets. While they were not leaders of any factions in those days, the sheer amount of property and money that they had coming in was pretty much insane. They were very well established before Carlo Gambino entered the scene. But once Carlo does enter the scene, he was really amazed at how respected and wealthy his cousins were at the time. Carlo, to solidify his roots even further, would marry Paul's sister, his first cousin Catherine. Paul, in turn, would solidify his roots by marrying Carlo's sister-in-law, Nina Mano. I know that sounds a little creepy, a little West Virginia, but it is what it is. In those days, cousins married cousins. In 1940, Paul would become a member of the Managano Crime Family. Once Albert Anastasia took over, he would elevate Paul to the rank of captain. Paul was able to really bring in a ton of money to the family, bringing in thousands of dollars a week, and he used the help of his cousin Carlo to really dig his heels deeply into the rackets. In 1957, two important things happened. The first was Albert Anastasia gets killed. That move was designed by Vito Genovese and Carlo Gambino. And basically, we've talked about it a ton of time before. Genovese wanted to take over, wanted to push Luciano out. He really couldn't do it without the support of Gambino, and Gambino really couldn't become the boss of his own family unless Anastasia was whacked, so they worked in tandem to kind of get that done. That move allowed Gambino to take over the boss of the newly named Gambino Crime Family. And that direct link from Carlo to Paul put Paul in a very, very, very strong position. Gambino would name Neil Delacroce as his underboss, but not long after that, he also named Paul as an underboss as well. So Carlo functioned with two underbosses. The move didn't make Delacroce very happy. The first problem was Neil was a traditionalist, and he was very, very tight with Anastasia. He didn't believe in lacking a boss to take over, but Neil, the consummate mafia player that he was, kept quiet and just did what he was told, and rightly so. He should have probably been the only underboss to Gambino. Paul probably shouldn't have been made an underboss. But it is what it is. He earned it, but Carlo always believed that blood was thicker than water, and he didn't trust anybody that wasn't a blood relative, and that goes back to the old Sicilian shit over in Italy. Carlo never really trusted Neil, and that feeling would transition to Paul years later down the line. Carlo placed Paul into the unions, and he recognized Paul's ability to consolidate and smooth over problems. He recognized very early on that Paul wasn't a guy that was going to pick up a gun and kill people. Paul was a guy that had a mind for business. He wanted Paul to be the brains of the operation while Neil would be the brawn. So in other words, Paul would get into the unions, get involved into businesses, and Neil would be the guy who would deal with killing people. Paul would end up working, like I said, deeply into the unions, and he would work on construction contracts, while Neil traditionally would loan shark, extort, and kill. This is perhaps where the moniker of Paul not really being a street gangster really began. Also in 1957, Appalachian happened. Paul was an attendee at the Appalachian Conference, which was a meeting basically called by Vito Genovese to recognize the mob, be recognized by the entire mob as the boss of the new Genovese crime family, as well as a meeting for them to recognize Carlo Gambino as taking over the Gambino crime family. And it was also a meeting designed to discuss narcotics trafficking. He would be arrested at that meeting, would clam up, refuse to utter a word, and would be convicted on contempt of court, and would end up serving 7 months in prison for that. In January of 1960, Castellano would be sentenced to 5 years in prison for refusing to divulge information about Appalachian, and the government basically called it a conspiracy to withhold information. However, in that November or the following November, the conviction would be overturned by the appeals court. And 1975 was a big year for Paul Castellano, and he would show his violent side. He would order the murder of Vito Borelli killed. He was the boyfriend of his daughter Connie. He basically had him murdered because Borelli made the mistake of comparing Castellano to Frank Perdue, the owner and spokesman for Perdue Chicken, and he was so enraged that anybody would call him that. It just insulted him because he wanted to be known as a killer, not a businessman. And so he orders the murder. He felt disrespected, which was sort of a hypocritical thing. And as we move a little further, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it wasn't until 2004 that it came to light that Castellano had Borelli killed, because at the trial of Joey Messino admitted to killing Borelli as a favor to Paul. Also in 75, he would be indicted for conspiracy to commit extortion, loan sharking, and tax evasion. The case, however, never got far because the witness in that case refused to testify. It's long been asserted that Castellano threatened to kill him, his wife, and his entire family if he testified. The reality of that, however, I think is probably not true. He probably threatened to kill him, but probably not his family. I can't imagine Paul Castellano would go that far with it. Late in 1975, Carlo Gambino sort of begins to take a turn for the worst. He's sick a lot. He would have bouts of breathing problems and fainting episodes, and pretty much it put Paul in to run the day-to-day operations of the family, and obviously to split it with Delacroce. But really, Paul was the guy that was moving things. And while Carlo was still the boss in name, Paul pretty much was in control of a lot of things. In 76, when Carlo dies of a massive heart attack, Paul gets named official boss of the Gambino Crime Family. This is what the big misnomer was about the whole entire ordeal with Big Paul being named boss. And it's something that I see a lot of people talking about, but they don't really get specific with it, so we're going to try to get a little specific here. While Neil and Paul split duties pretty much for the most part, it was Paul who technically was running the day-to-day operations. When Carlo officially made him boss, it was not universally accepted at all. Those on the inside and outside thought it was a really bad decision made by Carlo Gambino. Paul really didn't have a lot of interactions with the capos prior to Gambino's death and was more apt to deal with business discussions rather than the rackets. While Paul was bringing in money from legit enterprises and illegal enterprises, the bulk of the money coming in was from the leadership at Della Croce, and there were those who felt that the family would be better suited to be run by somebody who was deep in the trenches with the capos and somebody who was better received and had a presence versus someone who was off getting the next business deal done. It's long been said Della Croce was a gangster's gangster and talked to the captains of the family and really ironed out a lot of things, whereas Paul was very standoffish. It's also worth noting that Della Croce was in prison when Paul was named boss on tax evasion charges, so any sort of disagreement over the naming of Paul as boss, if Della Croce could have made a disagreement or an argument against it, he was in prison, really didn't have a choice. November 24th of that year, Paul officially was inserted and recognized as boss of the Gambino crime family, and that move in and of itself would actually split the Gambino crime family into two factions. As Paul takes over, his vested interest was more business than street politics. He ended up shunning his nose at street guys and would rather have business meetings with entrepreneurs. I actually did reach out to somebody who knew Paul Castellano, and this is exactly what he told me. He said, Paul was a gangster, make no mistake. He would order your death in a second, but the discontent really came about because he didn't intermingle with anybody. He was too busy with his own affairs and banging his maid. He was like that before he took over. He didn't know half the men under his own thumb. He was a greedy guy too. He always wanted more and more and more. He took 5 times more home than Carlo ever did. Carlo believed that everybody should eat, but under Paul, people were fucking starving. They blamed John Gotti for everything, but the reality is all the family signed off on Paul getting killed. Money makes everyone jump. So there you have it. As boss, Castellano would continue to operate the family as a business more so than a crime family. Castellano would venture out and end up controlling illegal businesses, then would use his business contacts and power to turn them into legitimate enterprises, which would bring millions and millions and millions of dollars into the family, but more specifically, put money in his pocket. Castellano is also often said to be or was the boss of bosses. And this title is ridiculous only because Luciano got rid of the title back in the early days. He got rid of it because he felt like nobody should be over top of anybody. He reinserted it when Genovese started his shit. But the reality is that if anybody put that moniker boss of bosses on themselves, it was Paul. And the reason why is because he presided over the biggest of the New York City crime families at the time. Through unions, the more he would get into construction, food supply business, massive extortion rackets, gambling, porn, loan sharking, and more. Paul inherited the waterfront and still controlled the eastern seaboard through the Longshoremen's Union, which tapped from New York City all the way down the East Coast, Norfolk, Virginia, being the epicenter of the Longshoremen's Union. One day I will tell a story about that because I knew somebody who ran the fucking waterfront down there that told me some serious stories about Carlo Gambino. One of the businesses Castellano had was named Dial Poultry, which supplied over 300 butchers in New York City. The business was legit, but not legit at the same time. And here's why. Castellano would cut several corners to make the business profitable, and he would use extortion as a way to force customers to buy his products. So it's like saying, okay, there's 300 of you, you're all going to buy my product. If you don't, we're going to shake you down. There's going to be a big problem. It's basically a forcible shakedown. Another company, Scare Mix Concrete Corporation, was run by his son Phil, who controlled all the concrete construction business in Staten Island. Outside of Staten Island, Castellano would basically sit in the driver's seat for the Concrete Club. The Concrete Club was a design by which all mob families would divvy up territory and split profits from the revenue of all New York City developments and developers. Donald Trump, for instance, I'm sure paid payoffs back in the day. You couldn't build a building without doing so. They could not only control the unions, but they could inflate the prices which was a huge profit for the entire mafia, not just the Gambino crime family. They were so powerful that it's been said that any development needing north of $2 million had to get the concrete club's permission before pouring an inch of concrete. Castellano, like I said earlier, he really controlled the unions, and he controlled the important Teamsters Union, Chapter 282, which provided the workers that poured the concrete to every single major building projects in New York City. So not only was he controlling the price, he was controlling the market flow, and now he's controlling the workers. So it was all-encompassing. Guys like him and Tony Salerno made a killing this way. In 1978, Castellano orders the murder of Nick Scabetta. Nick Scabetta was a Gambino associate, was murdered at the behest of Paul Castellano. Scabetta was a known drug addict, and according to Castellano, he was bringing too much heat into the family and had insulted a female cousin of Frankie DeCicco. Castellano handed the contract to Frankie, and Frankie was told to inform Scabetta's brother-in-law, who was Sammy Gravano, about it. Gravano didn't handle the news well, and he actually threatened to kill Paul Castellano as a result. Many say that's why Sammy would go along with murdering Paul just a few short years later so easily. There were rumors on the street, however, and I got to mention this, that Gravano was in some sort of sexual relationship with his brother-in-law, and that Sammy really killed him as a result of that information coming out. He didn't want that out. We probably won't know the reality of that, but there are two sides to every story. Over the next 2 years, Paul would have 3 more men kill. The guy Paul went to for murder, obviously murder and mayhem, was Roy DeMeo. Paul would have James Eppolito and his son James Eppolito Jr. Killed. James Eppolito actually was a captain. Allegedly, Eppolito Sr. had complained to Castellano that Anthony Nino Gaggi was stepping on toes by operating in his territory, and he asked for permission to kill him. Castellano really didn't give him an answer. He just kind of listened to him, and then Castellano goes behind his back and he tells Nino Gaggi about Eppolito wanting to kill him. And what does Gaggi do? He grabs Roy DeMeo, and then they go and they kill the father and the son. That's sort of some backstabbing shit. I don't understand exactly why Castellano would go behind somebody's back like that, which shows, one, that Castellano had absolutely no problem being violent, had absolutely no problem killing somebody or having someone killed. But I think the reality of it is that this is probably more of a reason why a lot of people stopped respecting Castellano, just because it didn't seem like he had the ability to sit down and iron shit out. It was, just kill him. So, like I said, it may not have happened exactly that way, but everything that I've been able to kind of dig up really points to Paul not really being a dignitary in that sense of the word. It was just, kill him, fuck him, I don't want the problem, which shows his brutality, which a lot of people say he didn't have, but he actually did. So in 1973, Paul makes an agreement with the Westies, which was the Hell's Kitchen Irish contingent. Paul's reasons for wanting to have the Westies under his control was for several reasons. The first thing is he wanted a cut of their profits. That's the first thing. 2, he wanted an army outside of his own family who would kill on his orders and could pull law enforcement away from blaming the Gambino crime family. In return, the Westies wanted protection from the Gambinos, which would keep the other 4 families from encroaching on their turf and profits. Jimmy Coonan would meet with Paul Castellano, and they agreed to terms, but Castellano gave him a warning. You guys have to stop acting like cowboys. Stop acting wild. You're going to be with us now, and anyone that's going to get killed, you have to clear it with us first. And Roy DeMeo was put in charge of watching over them. So while Jimmy Coonan agreed in principle, I don't think he ever really had any intention of keeping that agreement, because if you know anything about the Westies, they just started killing everybody. And always used sort of the Gambino backing as a warning for anybody else to stay away from them. While Paul was making alliances, he also aligned with the Cherry Hill Gambinos. They were a group of Sicilian heroin importers and distributors from New Jersey, which Paul also used as hitman. With the Westies on board, the Cherry Hill Gambinos, and Roy DeMeo, Paul had an army of verifiable killers. Perhaps the one thing that truly infuriated the mob was the drug rule. Gambino had long been against drug dealing. However, he was one of the biggest importers, along with the Bonanos. while Gambino wasn't necessarily tracking in as much as others, he took a huge cut and a huge profit. And for Paul to have the same stance yet allow the Cherry Hill Gambinos to sort of operate really infuriated everybody. How can you say that this group can do it but nobody else can? It's the same notion that Angelo Bruno had. He didn't want any of his guys selling drugs but allowed the Cherry Hill Gambinos to do their thing. So Angelo Bruno took a kickback. So Angelo Bruno's getting money for it, but then he's telling everybody else, oh, you can't earn. And so that's the reality of it. And that infuriated a lot of mob guys. In 1980, Castellano orders the murder of his former son-in-law, Frank Amato. Frank Amato was a hijacker and petty criminal who allegedly smacked Paul's daughter around a bit. According to the FBI, Roy DeMeo was dispatched and killed Amato, dismembered him, and tossed his parts into the ocean while on a boat. In 1981, Paul would meet with Frank Perdue twice. The reason was because he needed Castellano's help because there was a threat of unionization down in Virginia with Perdue facility. The workers wanted to unionize, Perdue wanted it stopped, and he went to Castellano for help. And according to Frank Perdue years later, him and Castellano never really had an agreement, but it's kind of worth noting that the union thing never fucking happened. So obviously Paul stepped in and did something. And what's hilarious is Borelli is killed years prior because he calls Castellano Perdue. And what is Castellano doing? Basically being Perdue and meeting with Perdue. As his wealth grew, Castellano insulated himself even more, building his lavish 17-room mansion in Tot Hill. He would also begin a love affair with a maid, while his wife was living right in the next room. He would force his captains to come to his home, including Danny Marino, John Gotti, Tommy Gambino, Jimmy Fallia, to basically give him money and take orders. While Paul sauntered around in his silk robes, he refused to meet outside of his own home, and guys on the street were effectively starving. Under Gambino, typical mob capos handed up 10% of their earnings. Under Castellano, it was 20% and sometimes 25%. So that's a huge leap. That's 15% higher than Gambino. Gambino wasn't greedy. Gambino knew how to work it. Paul just wanted money, money, money. And underneath of Paul's leadership, guys were having a problem making money, which is exactly why they turned to selling drugs. They had no choice. And at the same time, Paul pretty much bans drug selling completely. Once again comes out with it and says, there will be absolutely no drug profits, even though he knew Roy DeMeo was selling drugs. And the Cherry Hill Gambinos, he had no problem taking Roy's big payoffs. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in what he was saying. John Gotti, on the other hand, hated Paul Castellano. Perhaps it was his closeness to Della Croce, the way Gotti saw the streets, but Gotti had sort of a fuck you attitude, and underneath of Paul's nose, Gotti's crew begins selling heroin, and it was a direct slap in the face to Paul. Gotti knew, however, as long as Neil Della Croce was alive, he was probably going to be safe from Paul. But it was Paul Castellano who, believe it or not, a lot of people may not know this, it was Paul Castellano who put the contract for $500,000 on the head of Donnie Brasco. He wanted Donnie Brasco fucking dead, but it was Tony Salerno who sat down with Paul, talked him out of it, saying, look, we don't kill cops, we don't kill agents, we just kill each other. And Paul would relent and drop the contract. So the contract on his head that Donnie Brasco, or Joe Pistone, talks about wasn't put on his head by the Bonanos, it was put on his head by Paul Castellano. In 1983, Castellano orders the death of Roy DeMeo. There are a lot of reasons for the murder, but basically the problem was Roy was just killing people in record numbers, some at the behest of Paul, some on his own, for vengeance. The other issue was the car theft ring and the chop shop shit that Roy had going on. They were all getting indicted. DeMeo had become sloppy. Castellano knew that with the testimony of Dominic Montiglio, he could be directly associated with DeMeo, and anything that DeMeo had going on or was doing could tie Paul in. And he had done certain things without Paul's knowledge or permission, and it was going to create a big problem. So DeMeo's got to go, and he ends up sending Nino Gaggi, Anthony Center, and Joey Testa to kill Roy in a garage, and they ended up dumping his body in the trunk of his car. In 1984, the FBI would obtain a warrant to install wiretaps and bugs into Big Paul's house. They knew where he conducted meetings After running into his maid, Gloria Olarte, on the street, they basically asked her a couple questions. Paul had always told her not to lie to the FBI, always be cordial, and she ends up really giving up where he conducted his meetings, which was his kitchen. She ends up giving that up to the FBI, and the FBI wants to get into the house, but they got a problem. Paul has Dobermans, which bite, so they end up drugging the dogs, and they sneak into the house while Big Paul is down in Florida, and they bug the shit out of his whole house, especially the kitchen. And the information that they got as a result would end up burying Paul Castellano. In March of 1984, Castellano gets indicted on racketeering murder charges for the deaths of the Ippolitos, extortion, narcotics trafficking, theft, and prostitution. He would end up paying bond and would be released on $2 million bail. Then, in March of 85, while still awaiting trial on other charges, he would be indicted for racketeering again, which ultimately would become what we know now as the commission case. He would end up putting $3 million in bail down and getting released. So here's where some events start to happen. December 2nd, Dela Croce dies. One of the biggest problems was that Gotti's crew had been indicted for drug trafficking prior. Paul was furious about it and knew from the case that Angelo Ruggiero had been caught talking shit about everybody on wiretaps. He had refused time and time again to hand over the tapes, which Castellano wanted. Castellano wanted to hear what he said. Castellano appealed to Dela Croce, but Dela Croce just stalled. Repeatedly kept stalling. Well, Paul, I can't get the tapes. The lawyers got them. I'm trying to get them. Dela Croce knew that Paul was likely going to kill every single one of them over this issue. Probably not Dela Croce, but the Gotti crew was going to be wiped. What Dela Croce didn't know, what the Gotti crew didn't know, what Angelo Ruggiero didn't know, was Castellano already had the tapes. And all he was doing was seeing if Dela Croce was going to be loyal to the boss or to John Gotti and his crew. The reality is Ruggiero should have been fucking killed for that. I don't know Angelo, never knew Angelo. I'm sure he was a great guy. But the reality is, his mouth got a shitload of people arrested, and they should have killed him over it, if we're going to go by a street code. But with Dela Croce dead and Paul under indictment, the only recourse that Paul really had at this point was to disband the Gotti crew, which he was going to do. The problem is Gotti thought he was a dead man and realized without Dela Croce, nothing stood in his way and he could shoot it out if he needed to. To add to Gotti's anger, Castellano did a few other things that just pushed him over the line. Castellano didn't attend Dela Croce's wake, which was a sign of disrespect. But really, it's probably Paul didn't go likely because he didn't have any respect for Dela Croce after the tapes. He realized that Dela Croce was just supporting Gotti and not him. He had already heard the tapes, and that's likely why he didn't go. The other reason for not going is a boss just doesn't show up at a funeral. Too many eyes, too many FBI agents, etc., etc. After Dela Croce's death, Castellano ends up naming Tommy Bellotti the underboss. Bellotti was a loan shark and had zero diplomatic skills. By all accounts, he was a tough guy, but just sort of an asshole. But he gets the gig because he drives for Paul Castellano. Nothing more, nothing less. And then the third nail in the coffin for Paul Castellano was he announces he's breaking up the Gotti crew and following the more bullshit about the tapes again. So at this point, Gotti has seen enough. It was kill or be killed. It was either lead or follow. He gathered up Gravano, DeChico, Lenny DiMaria, Joe Armone, and others. And Gotti originally had wanted to kill Castellano outside of his house in Staten Island. He thought it was an easier way to rid themselves of Castellano, but he worried that the FBI was sitting on top of the house and sitting on top of the area, and it wasn't worth the risk. It wasn't until Castellano, a month later, suggests that they have a dinner meeting on December 16th, that the wheels sort of fall off the car. It was a perfect situation. Castellano didn't see it coming because he called the meeting, and the hit would be basically taken care of that night. It was on December 16th of 1985. Tommy Bellotti and Castellano pull up outside of Sparks Steakhouse on East 46th Street near 3rd Ave, I think, and Gotti would ascend the throne. And I know that this isn't a huge, in-depth Paul Castellano show, but I think the one thing worth noting in all of this was that Paul Castellano was a violent guy. He wouldn't hesitate to order a death, and I think the mistake that Paul Castellano made he made a lot of missteps during the way. One could argue, was Paul Castellano a good boss for the Gambino crime family? I think he was in a lot of extents. He knew how to run a business. I think that, however, the way that he chose and his style to run a family really rubbed street guys the wrong way. I think the fact that the kick up went from 10% to 20 to 25% in some cases is absurd. He won't let them earn money. He's got the concrete club where he's filling his pockets, and guys are upset. Guys are convoluted and pissed off at the idea. Delacroce carried a lot of fucking respect and a lot of fucking weight. And he sort of slapped Delacroce in the face. We can argue whether that was like totally warranted or not. The case may have been that it was warranted, because if the boss is the boss is the boss, you do what the boss tells you. How many wiretaps did we hear where Gotti said it? How many wiretaps did we hear where Delacroce said it? Difference is Delacroce protected Gotti. And I think that was a slap in the face to Castellano. And I think that turmoil went all the way back to when Anastasia was killed, because at the time Delacroce was the underboss to Anastasia. He was underneath Gambino, who was the underboss to Anastasia at the time, and I don't think it ever sat right with with Delacroce how Anastasia was taken out. But he went along with it because it was business as usual, and that's just what you did. But I think that's why Gambino didn't name Delacroce as boss. I think he wanted to keep it in the family. And ultimately, I think it was a mistake. I'm not saying that because Gotti had a very relatively short run. He really did. Very, very, very short run. So if somebody said to me, well, who else could have done it? If Delacroce was named boss, I think it would have been business as usual. I think the Gambinos would have continued to flourish. I think Paul was a fucking mistake. I think, Gotti's run being so short. So who other than Gotti, I really couldn't tell you. There's probably a list of 10 names I could give you that might have been able to function as boss better than Gotti was. Certainly would have kept themselves out of the limelight a bit. But that's pretty much the story of Paul Castellano, and I hope there were some things that you learned that you didn't know before. But anybody that says that Paul Castellano wasn't tough, they're a little wrong. I think the street persona of John Gotti versus Paul Castellano is night and day, big differences, and that's why people like to say Paul Castellano wasn't a gangster's gangster. He was, but he operated differently. Frank Cali, for example, ran a lot like Paul Castellano. Didn't need to use violence, could just maintain by business and keeping everything in order. And the ones that can keep everything in order, like your Russell Buffalinos, your Ray Patriarchas, guys that could keep Santos Traficante, guys that could keep the order and just keep the machine fucking running, never have problems. It's the ones like your Nicky fucking Scarfos who go fucking crazy, like it's the wild, wild fucking West. John Gotti, even to some extent, who create a fucking image and can't stay out of the press, can't stay out of the news. That's what happens. And so, from Paul's perspective, first of all, Gotti didn't need to kill Paul because Paul was going to go to prison for the rest of his life anyway. Would he have been able to maintain and keep control of the Gambinos in prison? I don't think so. I think it was too far gone after that. But if Paul never gets indicted in the commission case and anything else, who knows what could have happened? We can play those odds all day. All right, so all that being said, that's the show for today. You can reach out to us at Real Mob Talk 7 on Twitter. That's also where you can submit your questions to Q&A. Send me a direct message over on Facebook, Mob Talk Radio. All we ever ask that you do here is share the show. Even if you don't fucking like it, just share it. All that being said, we're going to be back next week with an all-new show, all-new Q&A. Yes, for the people that are asking about Detroit, it's coming. It's coming. It's just going to be a big series, and I'm still working on it, but it is coming. Any suggestions, any ideas anyone may have, shoot them over to me at Real Mob Talk 7. We're on Instagram as well, Mob Talk Radio. But send us suggestions and whatever ideas you might have. A lot of people have been reaching out to me to do their show and stuff like that, and I'm getting your messages. It's just I got to stagger certain things. So all that being said, thanks for listening to the show, and we will be back next week with an all-new show.